I'm Rebecca Morrison, and when I turned 32, my family had labeled me their greatest letdown. That's what everyone assumed anyway. For half a decade, I quietly developed my technology venture while maintaining absolute secrecy, watching the company's worth soar into the hundreds of millions as my family continued telling their social circle I was simply trying to find myself. Everything changed at my brother Daniel's celebration dinner for his upcoming marriage. I remained quiet through their usual dismissals until his future wife, Caroline, glanced my way and spoke words that seemed to freeze the moment. Before revealing what unfolded, drop a comment letting me know your location. Show some love with that like button and become part of our community where survivors become champions. My childhood unfolded in Philadelphia's prestigious Rittenhouse Square district, where the Morrison clan maintained impossibly high standards. My mother and father, Victoria and Richard Morrison, stood as cornerstones of Philadelphia's elite circles. Mother practiced as a celebrated cardiovascular surgeon, while father held seniority among partners at the city's most established legal practice. Competition defined everything from my youngest days onward. My elder sibling Daniel consistently emerged victorious. "Why can't you follow your brother's example?" became the constant refrain throughout my formative years. Daniel was my senior by 3 years and appeared flawless in every endeavor. He earned perfect grades, led the debating society, and eventually graduated as class representative. I represented the misfit piece constantly forced into an incompatible shape. My intelligence wasn't questioned, but my thinking followed different pathways. While Daniel committed textbooks to memory and reproduced information with precision, I perpetually challenged existing frameworks while envisioning improved alternatives. My elementary instructor described me as creatively disruptive. Father simply termed it obstinate behavior. "Rebecca, concentrate," Mother would reprimand during our compulsory family study sessions. "Your brother already finished multiple preparatory examinations today. What have your efforts produced?" Reality was that while they pushed conventional subjects, I secretly acquired programming knowledge. My first basic website emerged at 11, followed by a functional application at 14. None of these accomplishments registered as achievements within the Morrison household. Secondary education marked when the gap became insurmountable. Daniel gained acceptance to Exeter Preparatory Academy, an exclusive residential institution, while I continued at our local selective school. Every family meal transformed into Daniel's achievement showcase, with occasional uncomfortable inquiries about my mediocre mathematics performance despite costly private instruction. My sole supporter was Aunt Beatrice, father's younger sister, and the family's alternative disappointment, who pursued artistic endeavors instead of law or medicine. "They'll never comprehend individuals like ourselves, Rebecca," she told me one afternoon in her paint-covered workspace. "We perceive potential where they recognize only established roots. That's not weakness, it's strength." Daniel's acceptance to Princeton, following both parents' educational paths, generated weeks of celebration. My acceptance to Stanford the subsequent year, deliberately chosen for its innovation and technical programs, received tepid acknowledgement. "At minimum, it's comparably prestigious," Mother remarked with resignation, though Princeton would have provided necessary networking advantages. 3 semesters at Stanford preceded my withdrawal, the ultimate transgression within Morrison family values. The revelation day saw Father literally exit the room. "We've invested a fortune in your schooling," Mother stated, her tone glacial. "What's your plan now? Work serving coffee?" "I've received an employment proposition from a technology startup," I clarified. "The practical experience will exceed any degree's value." "A startup," Father scoffed upon returning. "Those glorified garage operations that vanish within half a year. This represents the future you're selecting over Stanford education?" Regardless of my explanations about the opportunity, they couldn't see beyond the missing prestige and absent credentials. From that moment forward, I became their warning story, the illustration of squandered potential. At family functions, relatives inquired about me in hushed whispers, and my parents offered ambiguous statements about me discovering my direction. Daniel, meanwhile, completed Princeton with distinction, then Princeton's graduate business program, before securing a coveted role at an international advisory corporation. He grew progressively uncomfortable in my presence, as though my failure might prove transmissible. The breaking point arrived at my cousin's wedding ceremony when I reached 24. I overheard Mother informing Aunt Sylvia they felt such concern regarding Rebecca, and at least we have Daniel bringing us honor. That evening, I committed to leaving Philadelphia entirely. I'd accumulated savings from my startup position and established technology industry contacts. The West Coast beckoned, and I needed to respond. "You're fleeing," Mother accused when I announced my relocation to Seattle. "I'm advancing toward something," I corrected. "Something beyond your perception." Father shook his head. "When this Pacific Northwest dream collapses, don't anticipate our rescue." As I prepared my apartment for departure, Aunt Beatrice alone offered assistance. "You understand what distinguishes you from other Morrisons?" she asked while sealing a carton. "What?" "You possess courage to fail on your own conditions rather than succeed on someone else's." Philadelphia receded behind me with 2 luggage pieces, a laptop, and $2,300. My family had cemented my position as the disappointment, the failure, the cautionary example. They remained unaware this failure actually represented the initial step toward constructing something surpassing their wildest imaginations. Arriving in Seattle with merely $2,300 should have frightened me. Instead, overwhelming liberation washed over me. Finally, I could establish success using my own measurements without the Morrison family standard perpetually finding me deficient. I secured a modest studio in Tacoma, affordable on my budget, and accepted employment at a medium-scale medical technology firm as an entry-level programmer. Compensation was humble, but learning possibilities proved extensive. My supervisor, Gerald Chen, rapidly became the guidance I'd always required. "You possess a distinctive systems perspective," Gerald observed after I'd restructured an operational procedure, saving the organization thousands of manual labor hours. "You don't merely observe current states, you envision potential outcomes." Unlike my family, Gerald genuinely appreciated my cognitive approach. He assigned increasingly sophisticated challenges and included me in stakeholder discussions, despite my junior status. During one such meeting, 8 months post-employment, inspiration struck. We debated medical information compatibility challenges, the capacity for disparate healthcare frameworks to transfer and interpret collective information. Current solutions proved awkward, costly, and still demanded extensive manual involvement. "What if we approach this inversely?" I proposed, sketching a preliminary diagram on my device. "Rather than forcing these outdated frameworks to communicate, what if we developed a universal interpretation layer, automatically processing and standardizing information regardless of origin?" The room became silent. Then the executive director stated, "That would revolutionize healthcare information management if achievable." "It's achievable," I maintained. "I understand the construction process." That evening, I remained awake until 4, creating the prototype for what eventually became Databridge, a healthcare information integration system that would reshape the sector. 6 months followed where I maintained my daytime employment while dedicating every evening and weekend to prototype refinement. When I finally presented my work to Gerald, his response validated my existing knowledge. "This represents breakthrough innovation, Rebecca. You must pursue this comprehensively." Resigning my position proved terrifying, but I'd saved sufficient funds for 6 months of financial runway. I transformed my modest studio apartment into an even smaller living area plus workspace, surviving on inexpensive meals and caffeine while programming 18-hour days. The breakthrough occurred when I demonstrated my prototype at a modest healthcare technology gathering. A venture investor attending approached me subsequently. "This addresses a billion-dollar challenge," she stated directly. "I want to invest." 3 weeks later, I possessed $450,000 in initial funding and incorporated my organization, Unified Care Technologies. I chose relative anonymity, utilizing only my initials, RM, in organizational materials, and employing a more seasoned executive as the public representative for investor discussions. This decision was partially strategic. Female entrepreneurs statistically obtain reduced funding, but also personal. I didn't want family discovering my success until I was prepared to disclose it on my conditions. The inaugural year proved brutal. I employed 3 individuals and we operated from a renovated storage facility in Tacoma. Some nights I slept beneath my workstation rather than returning home. Some moments I nearly surrendered. But progressively, medical facility by medical facility, we began establishing momentum. By the second year's conclusion, we had 20 employees and had secured another $2.7 million in subsequent funding. Our product was being utilized by 14 hospital networks across the nation, and we were beginning to generate profits. Year 3 delivered explosive expansion. Databridge was now being acclaimed as the answer the healthcare sector had awaited. We expanded to 48 employees, relocated to legitimate offices in Seattle, and I finally upgraded from my studio to a reasonable 1-bedroom residence. Throughout this period, I maintained minimal family contact. Holiday telephone calls and obligatory birthday messages constituted our communication extent. They never posed detailed inquiries about my work, apparently presuming I continued struggling at some insignificant technology position. I never volunteered information, permitting them to sustain their narrative that I was the family failure. By year 5, Unified Care Technologies was valued at $280 million. We held agreements with over 190 hospital networks nationwide, had expanded to Mexico and Australia, and employed over 90 individuals. Industry publications praised Databridge as the innovation finally resolving healthcare compatibility. I was now financially secure beyond anything I'd envisioned, yet I still maintained relative modesty compared to my wealth. My focus remained on the organization, not on external success demonstrations. The sole luxury I permitted myself was an apartment with a view of the Sound. Aunt Beatrice was the sole family member knowing the truth. I'd flown her to Seattle in year 3 and provided a tour of my facilities. "I always knew you'd prove them incorrect," she said, embracing me firmly. "But you realize you'll eventually need to tell them, correct?" "When I'm ready," I responded. "On my conditions." As circumstances developed, fate had alternative plans for the major revelation. The invitation arrived on a Wednesday morning in late October, a substantial ivory envelope with the Morrison family insignia embossed on the reverse. Even before opening it, I recognized it was something significant. My family never dispatched casual correspondence. Inside was a formal invitation to my brother Daniel's celebration dinner for his engagement to be conducted at my parents' residence in 3 weeks. There was also a handwritten message from Daniel. "It would signify much if you could attend, Rebecca. It's been too long." I sat at my kitchen counter staring at the invitation as my coffee grew tepid. 5 years had elapsed since I'd been in the same space as my complete family. Our interactions had been restricted to brief telephone calls and progressively infrequent messages. The last time I'd seen Daniel personally was 2 years prior when he had a business journey to Seattle. We'd met for an uncomfortable lunch, where he spent most of the time discussing his career achievements while asking ambiguous questions about my technology work. My immediate impulse was to decline. I had an organization to operate, important discussions scheduled, deadlines approaching. But something, perhaps curiosity, perhaps a lingering desire for family connection, made me hesitate. That evening, I contacted Aunt Beatrice. "The wandering daughter returns," she said when I informed her about the invitation. "Are you going to attend?" "I'm uncertain," I admitted. "Part of me thinks it would be returning to the danger zone. They have their narrative about me. Why subject myself to that again?" "Perhaps it's time to alter the narrative," she suggested gently. "You're not the same individual who departed Philadelphia 5 years ago." "I'm not returning to announce my success like some sort of vindication journey," I said firmly. "That's not what I'm suggesting," Beatrice replied. "But hiding your achievements indefinitely isn't healthy either. You've built something remarkable, Rebecca. That's simply truth. You don't need to display it, but you shouldn't have to actively hide it either." After our conversation, I sat on my balcony, watching the evening descend over the Olympic Mountains. Perhaps it was time to at least open the door to reconciliation, even if I wasn't prepared to fully walk through it. The next day, I confirmed yes to the invitation and reserved my flight to Philadelphia. The 3 weeks before the journey passed in a blur of discussions and product deadlines. I intentionally overloaded my schedule, leaving minimal time to dwell on the upcoming family reunion. The night before my flight, I stood before my closet, carefully selecting what to pack. This seemingly simple task became unexpectedly loaded with meaning. My wardrobe now contained designer pieces I could easily afford, but wearing them would immediately signal my financial success. After much deliberation, I chose understated quality basics. Nice enough to be appropriate for a formal family dinner, but nothing that screamed wealth or status. The flight from Seattle to Philadelphia gave me 5 hours to rehearse conversations in my head. How would I respond when asked about my work? How much was I willing to share? What would I say when they inevitably made dismissive comments about my career choices? As the plane began its descent into Philadelphia International Airport, I gazed down at the familiar landscape and felt a complex mixture of emotions, nostalgia, anxiety, and a strange sense of confidence that had been entirely absent when I departed this city 5 years ago. I took a taxi from the airport, watching the familiar landmarks pass by my window. Philadelphia had changed in small ways. New buildings scattered about, different businesses occupying familiar storefronts, but its essential character remained unchanged. Unlike Seattle's constant reinvention, Philadelphia prided itself on consistency and tradition. Rather than staying with my parents, as would have been expected, I had reserved a room at the Rittenhouse Hotel. This small act of independence was important to me. I needed neutral territory, a place to retreat if things became too overwhelming. After checking in and freshening up, I received a message from Daniel. "Looking forward to seeing you tonight. Parents are excited too." I doubted the truth of that last statement, but replied with a simple, "Looking forward to it too. See you at 7. At 6:45, I found myself standing outside my parents' townhouse, the home where I had grown up. I paused on the sidewalk, taking in the familiar facade with its perfectly maintained window boxes and polished brass fixtures. 5 years ago, I had departed this house feeling like a failure. Now I returned as the founder of a $280 million company. Yet my hand still trembled slightly as I reached for the doorbell. The door opened to reveal my father, Richard Morrison, looking exactly as I remembered him. Tall, imposing, and impeccably dressed in a tailored suit. "Despite this being a family dinner, Rebecca," he said, his tone formal as he leaned in for a brief, stiff embrace. "You made it." "Hi, Dad," I replied, stepping into the foyer that smelled of lemon polish and my mother's signature orchids. "Thanks for having me. Everyone is in the living room," he said, already turning away. "Your mother has been cooking all day." I followed him through the familiar hallway, past the wall of family photographs that chronicled our lives. I noticed my brother's side of the display had continued to grow. Graduation photos, professional headshot, vacation pictures, while mine had remained frozen in time, ending with my high school graduation. The living room fell momentarily silent as I entered. My mother rose from her seat, her expression a carefully composed mask of politeness. "Rebecca, darling," she said, embracing me briefly. "How was your flight?" "It was fine, Mom," I replied. "You look well." "This is Caroline," Daniel said, stepping forward with a tall, elegant woman at his side. "My fiancée." Caroline Bennett was not what I had expected. Based on my brother's past relationships and our family social circle, I had anticipated someone from a similar background. Old money, traditionally successful, perhaps another attorney or physician. Instead, Caroline had a warm smile that reached her eyes and a firm handshake. "I've heard so much about you," she said, and surprisingly she sounded genuine. "All bad, I assume," I joked immediately, regretting the self-deprecating comment when I saw my mother's slight frown. "Not at all," Caroline replied smoothly. "Daniel mentioned you work in technology in Seattle. That must be exciting." Before I could respond, my mother interrupted. "Let me introduce you to everyone else. You remember your Uncle Lawrence and Aunt Sylvia, of course, and Cousin Patricia and her husband Edward." The next 15 minutes were a blur of greetings with extended family members. Some genuinely pleased to see me, others clearly curious about the failure returned from exile. Aunt Beatrice arrived last, giving me a knowing wink as she embraced me warmly. "You look wonderful," she whispered. "Success suits you." The dinner setting was classic Victoria Morrison, formal porcelain, crystal glasses, silver candelabras, and elaborate floral arrangements. As a child, I had always found these formal dinners suffocating. Now they seemed like theater, an elaborate performance of wealth and tradition. As we took our seats, I found myself between Aunt Beatrice and my father's cousin Bernard, a tedious investment analyst who had always treated me with condescending politeness. Caroline and Daniel sat directly across from me with my parents at either end of the long table. "So, Rebecca," Uncle Lawrence called down the table as the first course was served. "Daniel tells us you're still in Washington making a go of it in technology. Are you?" The way he said technology made it sound like I was selling handmade jewelry at a flea market. "Yes," I replied simply. "I work in healthcare technology. Entry-level positions can be a good starting point." My mother interjected before I could elaborate. "Perhaps you'll work your way up to management eventually." I took a sip of water, choosing not to correct her assumption. "And where are you living now?" Aunt Sylvia asked. "Still in that studio apartment?" "I have a one-bedroom now," I replied, omitting that it was in one of Seattle's most exclusive buildings with panoramic views of Puget Sound. "Well, real estate on the West Coast is so expensive," she said with a sympathetic cluck. "We all have to start somewhere." Throughout the first course, I kept my responses minimal, allowing my family to maintain their narrative about my life. I could feel Aunt Beatrice's frustration beside me, but she respected my choice to remain vague. As the main course was served, my father stood to offer a toast. He spoke at length about Daniel, his academic achievements, his professional success, his perfect choice of bride. Then, almost as an afterthought, "And we're pleased that Rebecca could join us from Washington." I raised my glass along with everyone else, meeting Daniel's eyes across the table. For a moment, I thought I detected discomfort there, perhaps even guilt, but it was quickly replaced by his usual confident smile. The conversation shifted to Caroline and her family background, her career, how she and Daniel had met. I listened with genuine interest, finding myself liking my future sister-in-law more than I had anticipated. "Caroline works for a healthcare information company," Daniel explained proudly. "She's part of their hospital implementation team." "That sounds interesting," I said. "What kind of work do you do specifically?" "I help hospitals integrate our platform with their existing systems," Caroline explained. "It's challenging but rewarding. Our technology is really transforming how patient information is shared between providers." Something about her description sounded familiar, but I didn't immediately make the connection. "Technology is changing everything," my father said dismissively. "Though I still prefer to have an actual doctor rather than a computer making decisions about my health. It's not about replacing doctors, Dad," I found myself saying. "It's about giving them better tools and more accurate information." He raised an eyebrow, surprised by my sudden engagement in the conversation. "Exactly," Caroline agreed enthusiastically. "The platform I work with has actually reduced medication errors by 42% in some hospitals, because it ensures all providers have access to the same accurate patient information." Now I was truly paying attention. Those statistics sounded very specific and very familiar. "What's the name of your company?" I asked, a suspicion forming. "Unified Care Technologies," she replied. "We're best known for our flagship product, Databridge. It's revolutionary, really." I was so excited when they hired me 7 months ago. The table continued its conversation, but a roaring had started in my ears. Caroline worked for my company that I had built from nothing. My $280 million failure. Caroline was still talking, explaining to my confused relatives what healthcare compatibility meant and why it mattered. The founder is this brilliant woman who created an entirely new approach to the problem. She's quite private, though. Most people just know her as RM, but what she developed is changing healthcare delivery across the country. She paused, a slight frown crossing her face as she looked more closely at me. I could see the gears turning as she connected my name, my initials, and my mention of working in healthcare technology. Then her eyes widened, and she whispered just loud enough for those nearby to hear. "Wait, you're RM, the founder." The room fell silent, all eyes turning toward me. My mother's fork clattered against her plate. My father froze with his wine glass halfway to his lips. And just like that, my carefully maintained worlds collided. Time seemed to stop as Caroline's question hung in the air. The elegant dining room with its crystal chandelier and ancestral portraits suddenly felt airless, as if all the oxygen had been sucked out in that single moment of recognition. "You're RM," Caroline repeated, her voice stronger now. "Rebecca Morrison. You founded Unified Care Technologies." I met her gaze steadily across the table, aware of every pair of eyes fixed on me. In that crystalline moment of truth, I felt an odd sense of calm. "Yes," I said simply. "I am." The silence that followed was profound. My mother sat perfectly still, her face a mask of confusion. My father's expression cycled rapidly through disbelief, shock, and something that looked suspiciously like recalculation. Daniel stared at me as if seeing a stranger. "But that's a $280 million company," Uncle Lawrence sputtered, breaking the silence. "The Databridge platform is used in nearly every major hospital system in the country. 193 hospital networks in the United States, plus 26 in Mexico, and 14 in Australia, as of last quarter," I corrected mildly. "And our most recent valuation was actually $310 million. Aunt Sylvia let out a small gasp. Cousin Patricia was rapidly typing on her phone, presumably looking up my company. My father had set down his wine glass and was now leaning forward, his attorney's mind visibly reassessing everything he thought he knew about his daughter. "I don't understand," my mother finally said, her voice faint. "You never said anything about founding a company. You told us you worked in technology." "I do work in technology," I replied. "I just didn't specify that I own the company." Caroline was looking at me with a mixture of awe and embarrassment. "I'm so sorry," she said. "I didn't mean to put you on the spot like this. It's just everyone at the company talks about the founder like she's this mysterious genius. I never imagined." "It's fine," I assured her. "I've kept a low profile intentionally." "Rebecca is the CEO of Unified Care Technologies," Daniel asked Caroline directly, as if I couldn't answer for myself. "She's not just the CEO," Caroline explained clearly, still processing the revelation herself. "She's the founder. She created the entire Databridge platform. Our chief technology officer says her original programming architecture was revolutionary." She turned back to me. "The company holds 7 patents based on your original work. 8 now," I corrected gently. "The 8th was approved last month." Cousin Patricia held up her phone. "It says here that Unified Care Technologies was named one of the top 10 most innovative healthcare companies by Forbes last year. Number 7? I nodded. "We're hoping to crack the top 5 this year." My father cleared his throat. "Rebecca, perhaps you could tell us more about your company. It seems we've been uninformed about your professional achievements." There was a new tone in his voice, the same one he used when addressing successful clients or influential colleagues. It made something twist uncomfortably in my stomach. "Actually," Aunt Beatrice interjected, a fierce gleam in her eye, "I think what Richard means to say is that they completely underestimated you and are now realizing what a tremendous mistake that was." She raised her wine glass in my direction. "To Rebecca, who succeeded beyond anyone's expectations, except perhaps her own." The toast hung awkwardly in the air, with only Caroline, Beatrice, and a few others raising their glasses. My mother remained frozen, her perfectly manicured hands gripping the edge of the table as if to steady herself. "When you left Philadelphia," my mother said carefully, "you never mentioned starting a company." "I didn't start it immediately," I explained. "I worked for another healthcare technology company first, learning the industry. The idea for Databridge came about 8 months after I moved to Seattle." "And you never thought to tell your family about this success?" my father asked, an edge to his voice. I met his gaze directly. "When have you ever asked about my work in any detail? The conversations we've had over the past 5 years have been surface level at best. You asked if I was still in technology as if I was working at an electronics store." Daniel shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "I saw you 2 years ago in Seattle. You never mentioned founding a company then either. You spent that entire lunch telling me about your promotion and your new condominium," I reminded him. "When you asked about my work, you changed the subject before I could get into any detail." An uncomfortable silence fell over the table again. The family narrative about me, the dropout, The disappointment, the cautionary tale, was crumbling before their eyes, and no one quite knew how to proceed. Caroline, bless her, attempted to cut through the tension. "This is actually amazing," she said brightly. "I can't believe I'm marrying into the family of the woman who created the platform I work with every day. The hospitals I visit consider Databridge to be revolutionary." 310 million, Uncle Lawrence muttered, still stuck on the valuation. "Did you raise venture capital?" my father asked, slipping into business mode. Initially, I nodded. 450,000 in seed funding, then 2.7 million Series A and 22 million Series B. We've been profitable since year 3, so we haven't needed to raise additional rounds. "And your ownership stake?" he pressed. "Dad," Daniel interrupted, looking embarrassed. "I retain 53% controlling interest," I answered calmly. "The venture firms hold 28%, and the remaining 19% is split among early employees and our employee stock ownership plan." My father nodded, clearly impressed despite himself. My mother had still barely moved, her social mask completely fallen away as she struggled to reconcile her perception of me with this new reality. "So all this time," she finally said, her voice tight, "while we've been worrying about you, thinking you were struggling in a tiny apartment with a dead-end job, you've been what, a millionaire technology founder?" "On paper, at least," I acknowledged, though that was never the point. "Then what was the point?" Daniel asked, something hard in his voice. "To make us all look foolish? To prove us wrong?" "The point was to solve a problem that needed solving," I replied firmly. "To build something meaningful. The fact that it became financially successful was secondary." "Secondary?" my father scoffed. 300 million is hardly secondary. "For the Morrisons, perhaps not," I said quietly. "But for me, it was always about the work itself." My mother abruptly stood, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "I need to check on dessert," she announced. Though the catering staff had been handling everything all evening, she disappeared into the kitchen, her shoulders rigid. "I should help her," Aunt Sylvia murmured, following quickly. The remaining family members sat in awkward silence, the elaborate dinner now thoroughly derailed. Caroline looked between Daniel and me, clearly sensing the tension, but not fully understanding its roots. "I have to say," she ventured, "working for your company has been the best professional experience of my career. The culture is amazing, and everyone is so committed to the mission of improving patient care." "Thank you," I said sincerely. "That means a lot. We work hard to maintain that culture as we grow." "How many employees do you have now?" Daniel asked, making a visible effort to engage. 118, I replied. "We're opening a Philadelphia office next quarter, actually." "Philadelphia?" Aunt Beatrice perked up. "Will you be spending more time here then?" "Some," I nodded. "I'll need to be here for the launch and initial hiring." My father was watching me with a calculating expression. "The healthcare technology sector is booming. Have you considered acquisition offers?" "We've received several," I acknowledged. "But I'm not interested in selling. We still have too much work to do." My mother returned, composed once more, but with a certain brittleness to her smile. "Dessert will be served momentarily," she announced. "Rebecca, perhaps after dinner you could tell us more about this company of yours. It seems we have quite a lot of catching up to do." Her tone made it clear this was less an invitation for sharing and more an accusation of withholding. The carefully reconstructed mask of polite society couldn't quite hide the hurt and confusion underneath. As the dessert plates were set before us, I realized that this revelation, while satisfying in some ways, had opened a Pandora's box of complicated emotions and damaged relationships that wouldn't be easily resolved over crème brûlée and coffee. Dessert proved a tense affair. Conversation occurred in stilted bursts, with extended family members asking increasingly specific questions about my company, while my immediate family processed their shock in different ways. My father had shifted into networking mode, suddenly interested in every aspect of my business. My mother maintained a brittle smile, saying little. Daniel alternated between pride and something that looked uncomfortably like resentment. After dessert, as guests began to move to the living room for coffee, Daniel touched my elbow. "Can we talk?" he asked quietly. In the study. I followed him to our father's wood-paneled sanctuary with its leather-bound books and hunting prints, a room designed to impress rather than comfort. Daniel closed the door behind us and turned to face me. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked without preamble. 2 years ago in Seattle. Why keep it secret? I considered my answer carefully. Would it have changed anything between us if you had known? Of course it would have, he exclaimed. I would have been proud of you. I would have told everyone about my brilliant sister, the technology founder. The way you used to tell everyone about your brilliant sister, the college dropout, I countered. Daniel, our entire relationship has been defined by comparison. You winning, me losing. I needed to build something that was just mine, not measured against your achievements or our parents' expectations. He ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, momentarily disheveling it. I never saw it as a competition. You didn't have to, I replied. You were always winning without even trying. That's not fair, he protested. I worked hard for everything I achieved. I know you did, I acknowledged. And you deserved your success. But can you honestly say you've ever had to fight to be taken seriously by our parents? That you've ever been the disappointment? He was silent, unable to deny the truth we both knew. When I left Philadelphia, I continued, I needed to find out who I was outside of the Morrison family narrative. I needed to succeed or fail on my own terms. And you succeeded, he said quietly. Spectacularly. Yes, I nodded. But not to prove anything to anyone else. That's what I need you to understand. Before he could respond, there was a knock at the door, and our father entered without waiting for an answer. There you are, he said. All business now. Rebecca, I've been thinking. Your Philadelphia expansion presents some interesting opportunities. I know several hospital board members who would be valuable connections for you. We should set up meetings while you're in town. The swift transformation from dismissive parent to networking ally was jarring. Dad, I already have meetings scheduled with Pennsylvania Hospital and Jefferson. Our business development team has been planning this expansion for months. Of course. He nodded, undeterred. But personal connections can open doors that formal channels cannot. The Patterson son, Christopher, is chief of surgery at Temple University Hospital. I could arrange a dinner. I appreciate the offer, I said carefully. But we already have a relationship with Temple. They've been using our platform for over a year. My father looked momentarily thrown but recovered quickly. Well, there are other introductions I could make. The healthcare sector in Philadelphia is tightly knit. Richard, Daniel interjected, maybe now isn't the time for business networking. My father frowned, looking between us. I'm simply trying to help. Rebecca has built something impressive, and I have connections that could be valuable. The way those connections would have been valuable 5 years ago when I was starting out, I asked quietly. When I told you about my ideas, and you dismissed them as a Pacific Northwest fantasy. A flash of discomfort crossed his face. That was different. You were just starting out with no track record. Now you've proven yourself. And that's the only time I deserve your support, after I've already succeeded without it. The study door opened again and my mother appeared. Her perfect hostess composure had slipped, revealing the emotional turmoil underneath. Rebecca, she said, her voice tight. I think we need to talk. Daniel and my father exchanged glances. Then my father nodded. We'll give you some privacy, he said, ushering Daniel out. When the door closed, my mother remained standing, arms crossed defensively across her chest. Why didn't you tell us? She asked, echoing Daniel's question, but with a sharper edge. All these years, letting us believe you were struggling, barely getting by. Do you have any idea how worried we were about you? Were you worried, Mom? I asked gently. Or embarrassed? Color flooded her cheeks. That's an awful thing to say. Of course we were worried. You dropped out of college, moved across the country, barely communicated. And did you ever ask, really ask, about what I was doing? Did you ever show interest in my work beyond assuming it was insignificant? How could we know if you never told us? She countered. I stopped telling you things when it became clear you weren't listening, I said. When I left Philadelphia, Dad told me not to come back for help when my Washington dream failed. You both had already decided my story before I had a chance to write it. She sank into one of the leather chairs, suddenly looking tired. We wanted what was best for you. No, I corrected her. You wanted what you thought was best for me. There's a difference. We gave you every advantage, she said, a tremor in her voice. The best schools, tutors, opportunities. You gave me the advantages that would have helped you succeed, I replied. But I'm not you or Dad or Daniel. I needed different things. And now you've succeeded without us, she said, a hint of bitterness in her tone. Is that what tonight was about? Showing us all how wrong we were? Tonight was about coming to my brother's celebration dinner, I said firmly. I had no intention of revealing anything about my company. That happened by pure coincidence. She was quiet for a moment, studying me with new eyes. You really have built something significant, haven't you? Yes, I said simply. I have. And you didn't think that was something to share with your family? I sighed. Mom, family sharing goes both ways. When was the last time either of us really shared anything meaningful with each other? We've been going through the motions of family for years, but the emotional connection has been missing. She flinched slightly at this truth. I always thought you pulled away because you were unhappy with your choices, that you were avoiding us because you were ashamed. I pulled away because every interaction left me feeling judged and diminished, I explained. It was easier to keep my distance than to constantly defend my path. And now your path has led to extraordinary success, she observed, while we've been pitying you. I never wanted your pity, I said. Just your acceptance. The door opened again, and Aunt Beatrice poked her head in. Sorry to interrupt, but some of the guests are leaving. They want to say goodbye to both of you. My mother stood automatically, straightening her clothes and hair, the social mask sliding back into place. We'll continue this conversation later, she said, already moving toward the door. I followed her back to the living room where the extended family was gathering coats and saying goodbyes. There was a new deference in how they addressed me now. Subtle changes in body language and tone that acknowledged my unexpected status. Uncle Lawrence pumped my hand enthusiastically. We'll have to have lunch before you leave town, he said, pressing his business card into my palm. I have some investment ideas I'd love to discuss. Aunt Sylvia hugged me with newfound warmth. We always knew you were special, dear, she said, rewriting history on the spot. As the last guest departed, only the immediate family and Caroline remained. The atmosphere was heavy with unresolved tension and unasked questions. I should be going too, I said, reaching for my coat. It's getting late. You're staying at a hotel? My mother asked, sounding genuinely surprised. Yes, the Rittenhouse. You could have stayed here, she said, a hint of hurt in her voice. I think we all needed some space tonight, I replied diplomatically. Caroline approached me as I prepared to leave. I'm still mortified that I put you on the spot like that, she said. But I have to say it's an honor to meet you properly. What you've built has changed how we deliver healthcare. Her sincerity was touching. Thank you. And please don't be embarrassed. It was bound to come out eventually. Would you have time for coffee tomorrow? She asked hesitantly. I'd love to hear more about how you developed the initial concept for Databridge. I'd like that, I agreed, surprising myself with how much I meant it. Daniel appeared at her side, his expression still complex. I'll walk you out, he offered. At the door, he paused. This is a lot to process, he admitted. But I'm proud of you, Rebecca. Truly. Thank you, I said, searching his face for signs of the brother I had once been close to before competition, and comparison had driven us apart. That means more than you know. As I stepped out into the cool Philadelphia evening, I felt both emotionally drained and strangely liberated. The carefully constructed walls between my past and present had crumbled, for better or worse. What would be built in their place remained to be seen. Back in my hotel room, I kicked off my heels and collapsed onto the king-sized bed, emotionally exhausted. The ceiling fan spun lazily above me as I replayed the evening's events, a tangle of conflicting emotions swirling through my mind. Vindication, yes, but also sadness for the years of disconnect and uncertainty about what came next. My phone buzzed with a message from Aunt Beatrice. "You were magnificent tonight. Breakfast tomorrow, my treat." I smiled and responded my agreement. If anyone could help me process what had happened, it was Beatrice. Sleep came fitfully. My dreams, a chaotic mix of past and present. Childhood dinners where I was suddenly the executive. Board meetings interrupted by my mother's criticisms. I woke early, watching the sunrise paint the Philadelphia skyline in shades of rose and amber. Beatrice was already waiting when I arrived at the small cafe near Washington Square, dressed in her signature artistic layers despite the early hour. "There she is," she grinned, rising to embrace me. "The talk of Rittenhouse this morning, I imagine." "That bad?" I asked, sliding into the booth across from her. "Sylvia called me at 7 this morning to pump me for information," Beatrice confirmed. "Apparently she's telling everyone she always knew you had something special." I couldn't help but laugh. 5 years of pitying comments, and now suddenly I was always destined for greatness. That's Philadelphia society for you. Beatrice shrugged. "But enough about them. How are you feeling?" I considered the question carefully. Relieved in some ways. It was exhausting maintaining separate lives, but also uncertain. I don't know where things go from here with my family. "That's up to you," Beatrice said, stirring her coffee thoughtfully. "You're in a position of power now, not just financially, but emotionally. You get to decide how much of yourself to share with them going forward." I never wanted power over them. I sighed. I just wanted acceptance. "Sometimes we need the former to get the latter," she observed. Sad, but true. After breakfast with Beatrice, I met Caroline for coffee near her office. Away from the family dynamics, she was even more impressive, sharp, thoughtful, and genuinely passionate about healthcare improvement. "The implementation team has been pushing for certain features," she explained animatedly, describing challenges with the current system. I had no idea I'd be giving feedback directly to the founder. "That's exactly the kind of information I need," I told her. "The distance between development and implementation is something we're always trying to close." By the time we parted, I had gained not only valuable product insights, but potentially a friend. Against all expectations, my brother had chosen someone I genuinely respected and liked. The most difficult conversation came that afternoon when my parents requested I join them for lunch at their club. The setting was deliberate, neutral territory where social conventions would prevent any scenes, yet firmly on their turf. "We've been doing a lot of thinking," my father began once we were seated and the waiter had departed. "And we owe you an apology." The words were so unexpected that I nearly dropped my water glass. "We failed to see your potential," he continued. "We measured your success by traditional standards and missed the innovation and vision you possessed." My mother nodded in agreement, though I could see this was more difficult for her. "We were worried about you," she added, "but we should have trusted you more." Their apology, while genuine, still framed my success as the justification for their acceptance, something I had earned through achievement rather than deserved inherently. Yet it was a start. "I appreciate that," I said carefully, "but I need you to understand something. My worth as your daughter isn't tied to my net worth or professional achievements. If Databridge had failed, if I was working an ordinary job in Seattle, I would still deserve your respect and support." My father looked momentarily taken aback, but my mother surprised me by reaching across the table to take my hand. "You're right," she said quietly, "and that's a harder lesson for us to learn. I think we've always defined ourselves by achievement. We raised you and Daniel the same way. It hasn't been entirely healthy for either of us," I pointed out. "No," she acknowledged. "Perhaps not. Can we start over?" my father asked. "Not pretend the past didn't happen, but move forward differently?" I considered his request. "We can try," I said finally. "But it will take time. Trust works both ways, and we've all been hurt." Over the next few days before returning to Seattle, I had several more conversations with my family, including a surprisingly vulnerable one with Daniel. Sitting in a park near his apartment, He admitted to his own struggles with our parents' expectations. "You escaped," he said, tossing breadcrumbs to eager squirrels. I stayed and kept trying to be perfect. Sometimes I wonder which of us made the better choice. "It's not about better or worse," I told him. "We each found our own path. And for what it's worth, you're very good at what you do. So are you?" He smiled, the competitive edge finally absent from his voice. When I returned to Seattle, I carried with me a cautious optimism about my family relationships. The wounds of the past wouldn't heal overnight, but we had at least acknowledged them, a necessary first step. The experience changed me in unexpected ways. At work, I became more visible, stepping into my role as the public face of the company I had built. I recognized that my reluctance to claim credit had been partially rooted in old insecurities that no longer served me. I also began implementing changes to my work-life balance. The company had become my whole identity, partly because I had disconnected from other parts of myself, daughter, sister, friend. Now I began to rebuild those connections, not just with family, but with colleagues and with the broader community. 3 months after the celebration dinner revelation, I returned to Philadelphia for the official opening of our East Coast office. This time, my parents and Daniel attended the ribbon-cutting ceremony, visibly proud as I spoke about our company's mission and growth. "You're a natural leader," my mother commented afterward with genuine admiration rather than surprise. That evening, as we celebrated over dinner, I realized that while I hadn't received the validation I had craved from my family during those difficult early years, that absence had ultimately made me stronger. I had learned to trust my own judgment, to find validation in the work itself, rather than external approval. "What's next for Unified Care Technologies?" my father asked, now genuinely interested in my vision. "We're looking at international expansion," I explained. "Healthcare systems in Europe and Asia face similar challenges with information integration." "And what's next for you personally?" my mother asked, a question she had never really posed before. I smiled, appreciating the shift in perspective it represented. "Finding balance," I said honestly. "Building something meaningful professionally doesn't preclude building a meaningful personal life too. That's something I'm just learning." As I flew back to Seattle the next day, I reflected on the strange journey that had brought me to this point. 5 years ago, I had left Philadelphia feeling like a failure, carrying the weight of my family's disappointment. Now I returned as a success by anyone's standards, yet with the wisdom to know that external metrics were never the true measure of worth. In my apartment that evening, I stood on my balcony watching the fog roll in across Puget Sound. My phone buzzed with a message from Caroline sharing a photo of her successfully implementing our system at a new hospital. A second message followed from my mother asking about dates for my next visit. The journey of healing with my family had only just begun. But for the first time, I felt we were all walking in the same direction. I had spent years building a company that connected disparate systems, allowing them to communicate effectively. Perhaps now I could apply those same principles to reconnecting the disparate parts of my own life. Success, I had learned, wasn't measured by valuation or validation. True success came from creating something authentic, something that aligned with your values and made a difference. Whether that was a company, a relationship, or simply a life lived on your own terms. Have you ever had to prove yourself to people who doubted you or found success in an unexpected way? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this journey resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more stories about overcoming obstacles and finding your own path. And remember, sometimes the people who don't believe in you are the ones who inspire you to prove them wrong. Thank you for listening, and I wish you courage on your own journey of self-discovery.